So is the current market partying like it's 1999, or does this AI rally have legs to it? Stay tuned to find out.
Hi, welcome to T Minus Retirement, the podcast where we help launch your retirement into orbit. I'm Jay Cole.
I'm Dustin Watts.
And I'm Brian Owen.
And I don't know if it seems like it to you guys, but it kind of feels like it's 1999 again. What do you think?
Well,
yeah,
I Brian.
started using my Casio calculator recently, so I must be getting in touch with the 90s.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I've been reading a lot of articles that everybody wants to call the current market that we're in, the .com 2.0 type of market. And I just have a lot of problems with that. And I think we have some data here to back up why the market that we're currently in is a lot different than the 90s. I think that is safe to say.
Yeah.
I don't know how you guys feel, but I just don't see quite the comparison.
Well, for one, in the late 90s, you had all these domain names popping up, and they were essentially fake companies. And they were getting huge. They were in the market and having these huge PE ratios when they didn't really have any business per se, or it was very minimal. The hype around it was just so big because everything was so new when the .com era happened.
Well, and I think the most famous example is Pets.com. They took out the big Super Bowl ad. In less than a year, they went public, blew through all their money, and then went bankrupt. And there was a lot of companies like that, but I think right off the top, the biggest comparison from the 90s to now, back then you had all these companies that didn't have any earnings. They just had the promise of using the internet.
Yeah.
And using the internet to do all sorts of things. And as we all know, the internet, of course, changed everybody's lives for the better, but the valuations, like Jay was mentioning, that these companies were getting, the promise that it was just up and away forever, didn't quite, materialize. Today, we have AI, artificial intelligence, and it's changing the way we all do things. I mean, every day I'm using it for something. A lot of software that we use here at, in wealth management, they're incorporating AI into their program. So it's speeding up the things that we're doing that, that maybe took a little bit of time, speeding those things up. But the companies that are implementing it, I think this is the biggest key and the biggest reason why I don't feel like this is 1999, is these companies that are implementing it are real companies. They have real earnings. They're growing their revenue. And it's all the companies that we're familiar with. And really the biggest one that we'll talk about here is NVIDIA. Today, crossing over $5 trillion in market cap, which is just amazing.
Yeah.
So
totally.
Go ahead, Brian.
No. I was just going to say it when appropriate. I was going to say for the audience, just tell them real quick what PE means when we talk about that in relation to earnings.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing to mention. So there's a lot of ways that you value a company, and one of the most common is a PE ratio. It's price to earnings ratio. So it's the price of the stock divided by its earnings. And there are some averages that we look at, and when the PE ratio gets too high, it can be an indication that the company is too expensive and it doesn't have the earnings to support the price of the stock. And back in the late 90s, that's when you saw PE ratios go through the roof. And I think that's a good transition into my first chart here. So, what we're looking at is the PE ratio of the S&P 500 and this goes back, 30 years?
Yeah.
So back in the 90s, you can see this blue line was way up here. And this is just the S&P 500. It was over 30 times earnings, maybe 32, something like that. The average PE ratio, so if you want to think of what if you were to just take the average of the last 30 years, what has the market traded at on a valuation standpoint? Let's just say fair value would be about 17 and a half times earnings. And on the high end, that can get to 21 and a half times, on the low end, 13 and a half, but that's kind of the range. Now, a lot of time, the ratio will be in this channel here. Currently, we're a little bit above that channel, right? We're at 23.8. Does that mean that we're due for a crash? I mean, I don't think so. Look back here, back in 1997, we were above that channel, right? And it went on for a long time, even during the crash, the dot-com bubble actually bursting. I mean, it took, what is that? It took 6 years. We were six years there above average PEs. So I think that's one thing just to kind of put into context a little bit. Valuations and PE ratios are not a great timing tool, first and foremost, but it just gives you a sense of kind of where we're at. So if you want to say that this is 1999 and the current bull market that we're in, which is the most hated bull market, that I think we've ever been in, if you want to compare the two, I think you have to first and foremost look at where we are now versus where we were back then. And kind of on that note, back in the late 90s, it wasn't a hated bull market. And I think that's important because back then you had literally everybody on the same side saying this is just, there's no end in sight. It's just going to the moon. Of course, the internet, like I mentioned, it of course changed the world, but you didn't have too many naysayers. Now, I mean, you don't have a lot of people who are super positive. You have everybody looking for the negative. And ultimately, I think that's a good thing because it has that push and pull. And it means that there's plenty of legs, left in it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, these are legitimate companies too that have legitimate sales, and they're used primarily by almost every industry. NVIDIA is a good example.
Yeah, and we're going to look at those specifically here in a moment, but I think this is really really telling. So this goes through this is just a couple days old data here, but this is the S&P 500 if we were just looking at technology. So back in the 90s, if you remember, the PE of the S&P was like, we'll call it 32, but technology was 60. Somewhere in that range, about 60 times earnings, way above the average of 22 of just for just technology. Where we're at today is 30.4, so we're not even in that range above. I think that is really important to put into context. So think of it this way: the market right now, technology is half as expensive as it was even back then. So what does that tell you? I would say we're not in a .com type of bubble. We're not in an AI bubble per se. Now, let me mention this too. We're talking about the mainstream technology companies. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about quantum computing and robotic aviation and all these. There are some segments of the market that are crazy, but there always is. We're talking about the NVIDIAs of the world, the biggest company in the world. We're talking about the Amazons and Googles and Apple and Meta. Those companies are putting billions of dollars to work in it, with AI to implement it, to develop it. And, that's a lot different from some of these small segments of the market that are honestly minuscule in size compared to, the big companies that we're really talking about here.
Yeah.
And then I think this is interesting too. So we looked at the overall market and its valuation. We just looked at technology by itself. Now let's look at the market if we take technology out. So the rest of, the S&P 500. What does that tell you? Again, we're at 20 times earnings. The average is 16.8. And back in the 90s, it was 27, 28, something like that. So we're not at the same levels as we were in 1999. And the reason for that is because the earnings are supporting the price of these companies. I mean, I think that is the only explanation that you can really come, at least at this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, not so much the techflation, I'll call it, like it was in the late 90s, early 2000, like back then. Now there's real value, real money pushing this technology.
Well, not only is there real money, but it's, you know, it's getting to a level where they're seeing, you know, real adoption of it. It's not just this, you know, pie in the sky type of dreaming. It's like it's really happening.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so let me share my. So we looked at the broad market, right? And I think that tells a little bit of a story. Okay, first and foremost, we're not at cheap valuations, but we're not at 1999 valuations. And something to mention about that, I wouldn't expect us to be at cheap valuations, right? And I wouldn't expect NVIDIA to be cheap, or all these companies who are on the forefront of implementing technology and creating technology. I wouldn't expect them to be cheap. They're creating, you know, a generational type of technology. Why would they be cheap?
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean we want to pay, you know, the through the roof for them when we're purchasing stocks like that, but I wouldn't expect them to be cheaper than the market, certainly. So to kind of dive into this a little bit more, I went to Y charts, and I brought up a couple of different charts just for our visual people out there, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm a visual person. So I have, first and foremost, the size of the companies, the market caps of some of the biggest names, right? These are the biggest names in the S&P. You know, the Mag 7, I mean, they make up 25-30% of the S&P 500. These are the companies that are driving really the AI revolution, at least publicly traded. Because again, there's a lot of AI companies, they're not even publicly traded. They don't show up here. So we can't really, you know, demonstrate in this manner. But NVIDIA today closed at $5.042 trillion. The biggest company in the world. You have the other, I would say, big players that are definitely implementing AI. Of course, Apple's kind of lagging behind this group. I know Amazon's lagging a little bit too. Obviously, Microsoft and Google are really trying to catch up to what the you know, Chat GPT and all those types of AI products. You know, they're trying to play a little bit of catch up, but you can see the size of these companies have certainly grown over the last couple of years. This is a 5-year chart. NVIDIA has grown, you know, the most in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
This right here is a measure, without getting into the weeds of it, this is a measure basically of how good is your business at generating cash. You know, it's your earnings before you have to pay your interest and your taxes, and you depreciate things and all of this sort of stuff. So the general takeaway is, look, these companies have increasing earnings, and they're not negative earning companies like we had back in the 90s. I mean, these are serious dollar amounts that
they're not based on hype anymore.
No, I mean, they're delivering.
Oh yeah.
And the last one here is, again, we'll go back to the PE ratio, because we can look at the market's PE ratio, then we can look at the individual companies' PE ratio. And this is forward PE, which is like their estimated PE going forward. And what you see is, okay, they're not in the hundreds or thousands like, you know, some of these companies were back in the dot-com bubble. NVIDIA at, we'll call it 46. The rest of them are pretty, while they're not cheap, they're not exorbitant.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I bring this up, because what I thought was really interesting was some of these companies are getting cheaper, have gotten cheaper as this AI run has been going. And the reason for that is as their stock price has been going up, they've been getting cheaper because the earnings have been delivering.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. The other, their stock price goes up. That's one side of the equation. The other side is earnings are going up faster, so it brings their PE down. And that's what you see here. When you see these drops, they have earnings that come out and it readjusts the PE. And I think that's something to look at. I wish I could compare it back to 1999. That's a little challenging to do, but I don't think that this is something that is absorbent, at least right now.
Yeah. Definitely not what people make it out to be.
No, you have a lot of the articles out there really doom and gloom, and I think I didn't coin this. If you watch CNBC, Josh Brown coined this, but I think it's right on the money. I think a lot of people want to be the person that calls the next crash. They want to be the person that warned everybody of the financial crisis. They want to be the person that warned everybody of the .com bubble, and you have all these people kind of falling over themselves to do that.
Yeah.
So I just want to show one last chart here before we switch to a little bit of a different topic.
Sure.
And this is the same companies, same time frame that we were looking at, and this is their revenue. Okay. So it's the revenue change. So basically you're seeing growth in their revenue, but the purple line is NVIDIA. And so the reason NVIDIA is growing revenue in the fashion that it is, and obviously magnitude more than all these other companies, anytime somebody is building a data center to implement, this technology that we're talking about, they need the best chips, the best computing power out there, and NVIDIA is really the ones that are, they're I don't want to say they're the only game in town, but they're really they're the best
top
game
tier.
in town.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I think if this line was declining and their prices were going up and PEs were going up, I would say, yeah, maybe that's something to really be concerned about. But I don't quite think that don't quite think that's the case.
And that's a good point. Those of us who have built gaming PCs before, some of us were into that trend in the past, and you remember, it's like when you're pricing out the NVIDIA graphics processor compared to the alternatives, the NVIDIA was the one you wanted. It was always the one that cost a little bit more.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, and
sometimes
they're always in short supply.
Yep. Exactly.
Now, changing gears a little bit, along with all of these articles about this is this the next .com bubble? People are pointing to the rise in gold, and they're saying, is that telling us something, that you have people fleeing and buying gold as a safe haven? And obviously, gold has had a great run, but I think there's an explanation to that. And we've owned gold, in our client portfolios for a couple of years now, but I think the explanation goes to what J.C. Peretz put out from Trend Labs. He was talking about, the percentage of basically gold reserves around the world. And this chart here really shows a picture. Gold rises to 30% of global reserve holdings. You have all these countries and central banks around the world, and I think I've talked about this, but central banks have been buying gold for quite some time now, really, and they're doing it methodically, and they're doing it pretty aggressively. And when they have a lot of assets that they can keep, within a central bank, some of that is dollars and some of that is U.S. Treasuries. But what we've seen and what the chart shows is that the U.S. dollar as a percentage of the total has been declining. So they're letting either they're selling treasuries or selling dollars, and they're buying gold. Well, this spike right here, and this, I'll gold colored line, I think tells the story. They've been buying gold, and that pretty much coincides with the rise that we've seen in gold itself. I don't think that personally, I don't think that it's a signal that people are expecting, the end of times or anything. It's just been one of those. It's been a good trade, and central banks have been buying it. Retail's, starting to buy it. Institutions are starting to buy it, and it's just been one of those things that it's been a great performer this year. And it's had some pullbacks here, but I think this really tells the story as to why gold has appreciated so much year to date. Now, all that is to say too, when we have these kind of moves in any stocks, it could be the quantum computing stocks, it can be the AI stocks that we were talking about, like NVIDIA. None of these runs go without pullbacks. And I don't think, a pullback in the stock points to the bubble bursting. I just think that there needs to be these resets, and there's going to be these recalibrations and repositioning, especially as we kind of turn the calendar here. We're only 2 months from the end of the year. There will be people that take profits and they'll redeploy that elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's healthy ultimately. I don't know that means that the AI is a fad. I don't think that it means AI is going away. I don't think it means much of anything other than people are going to start to take some of those profits, potentially after the calendar turns here, and deploy that capital elsewhere. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about that happening.
A good example might be, when smartphones were first starting out, obviously you had iPhone come out, but before that was the BlackBerry, and that was considered the latest and greatest in smartphones. Everyone in corporate was using it, and kind of seemed like, from that perspective at the time, that BlackBerries would just be the king of smartphones indefinitely. Well, of course, over time they just didn't compete well, and Apple and Samsung and Google took over that, and now BlackBerry's not even really. I don't even think they make phones anymore. I don't even think.
They just kind of focus, I think, on cybersecurity at this moment.
Yeah, but the concept of smartphones is still here. 20 something years later. That's never going away. I don't think. It's just it's evolved over time, and you have to fight to survive, or else you're just going to be crushed. You have to constantly be changing and evolving, and I think that's the same with AI.
Yep. There was a moment where BlackBerry actually tried to have an iPhone competitor. I don't know if you remember seeing that. It had a very short life. It was actually a touchscreen BlackBerry that tried to mimic it. And of course, I had one for a short time. And of course, it just not the same experience. People loved the iPhone experience. So that's what drew them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, one thing we hadn't touched on, apart from the companies actually developing AI and implementing AI, I think an area that's going to see a lot of usage of AI, like all the, let's just think of all these industrial companies and healthcare companies and HR companies and all these different companies that are going to, once it gets more refined, implement it into their business and become more efficient. I think that is really going to be something that we want to watch, and something that we can all participate again in the growth of those companies' stock prices once they're able to implement these things and show how AI is helping their business. I think that's kind of the next leg after whatever leg we're in now. I think that's kind of the next thing to watch, is how do these companies, everyday companies that they don't develop technology, but how do they use it and how do they make their businesses better? Because that's going to really be something to watch.
Yeah.
Because that can impact every business, small business. It's going to be really, I think, really powerful.
Well, you're absolutely right, Dustin, because we saw in the news even this week and even today, there was another article in the journal about how companies like Amazon are implementing the combination of AI and robotics to replace a lot of the staff that they had in warehouses. And then corporate jobs are also on the hook as well, because their white collar work is also looking at being replaced by agentic developments. So yeah, every industry, it's starting with large industries, but it's going to touch every industry.
Yeah, so there's some goods and some bad, right? On the potential for how does it impact jobs and those entry-level jobs, certainly. You know, we don't have all the answers to that. Only time will tell, but it's not going away. I think we all know that.
Oh, yeah.
All right, guys. Well, appreciate the conversation. We hope that you found the conversation helpful as well. If you did, please like and subscribe. We look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.
Bye, guys.